Joi, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to meet in Bali to visit your Project Jembrana, but I still recall with fondness the first time we had the chance to meet, and it was right after I started with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and we were meeting in Oslo at the Our Ocean conference, and both of us were going to talk about our passion for ending plastic waste in the environment. I spoke about the Alliance and you spoke about Jembrana, and your passion, your words, your commitment really caught me.
And I think it was one of those moments where you're going forward, right? And that was just so special and very, I guess, pivotal to me personally and quite symbolic, I guess, of the relationship that we've built since then.
One key takeaway for me from the Our Ocean conference was that no one can do this alone. And can we make sure that no matter where we sit in the world in the future, that plastic waste will not end up in the environment, but we will ensure that it goes where it belongs, and that is in the circular system.
I agree. And what I found by working on the front line is that, one, this problem is solvable. There's no question. But in order to solve it, we have to work top down and bottom up, right? So there's certain structural constraints that are sort of root cause dysfunctionalities that make it very difficult to set up and operate waste management systems and robust recycling systems. And at the same time, plastic is collected at the front line, and it can only really be stopped at the front line. So you need both, this bottom-up frontline approach, working together with the government, with the private sector to really create that change.
And I think for us, that's where Project STOP and you in particular and all your colleagues that are making an incredible, let's say, difference, because you really come in at the very local level, working with municipalities, communities. And I still remember when I visited Jembrana together with you and your colleagues, how we went through communication, conversations with the households. We went to the communities, we met with the local mayor as well, and understanding the complexity of the local situation is absolutely critical to identifying what the solutions are. It has to be done where the problem is. The solutions are local, although we are trying to address a global problem.
For me personally, I started, my background is management consulting. So I'm used to building models and I guess trying to figure out what should be true, right? And putting lots of numbers together and saying, okay, if we do this is going to work. Actually, going to the ground and building waste systems from scratch and, working hand in hand with local governments, you see the types of challenges that any frontline organization, whether they're doing waste, recycling, et cetera, faces. And honestly, like when we first started Project STOP, we started implementation for our first city in May of 2018. So, not that long ago. I remember, we tried to model everything out, and then we actually went to implement, and we kept finding over and over that there was things we didn't understand, and that our models we had to somewhat throw out, and so we got really good at experimentation, just very fast, sort of A/B testing, and then you go to the next thing and the next thing, and so I think my whole way of solving problems changed quite dramatically by actually doing the frontline work.
Yeah. And that's why you have to, going back to our point about collaboration and cooperation, like there's no single solution, there's no single actor that can go in, but we need to have all the different actors at the different levels involved. And so sitting behind a desk, in whether you do that in Jembrana or whether you do that in Singapore, elsewhere, it's only by being with the people, working with the communities that we are able to develop and create and model the solutions that are the ones that will make the real impact and the real difference. The way that we are setting up the Alliance and the way that we are defining and developing our project, it's around 4 pillars. It's infrastructure, which is focusing very much on waste management systems, including recycling. It's innovation, so developing new solutions to waste management challenges. It's around education and engagement, and of course, cleanup. Joi, how do those 4 pillars, how do they fit with Jembrana? Do you feel that you're addressing only one of them, or is it a project that cuts across all those 4 pillars?
Thanks, Jacob. This is a project that cuts across all 4 pillars. And when we think about waste management is a system, right? It's not, sort of one specific thing like infrastructure. It's actually, you need all of these parts to work together in order to create a system that's robust. And so when we think about the infrastructure pillar, this is things like the trucks and tricycles and the facilities that the waste is transported to, where it's then sorted into different categories on conveyor belts, where it then goes to become recycled. So infrastructure is a very big component, and it's what we traditionally think of when we think about waste systems. But then, this piece, participation and engagement, this is absolutely critical. And to be honest, I think it's actually harder than the sort of technological infrastructure component of the waste system. And this involves, like we were talking about earlier, this collaboration from national government, local government, the school system, the women's group, the religious groups, youth group, all of the different workers, our team, so there's literally hundreds of people that are involved to actually make a waste system operate in Indonesia. And that gets quite complicated. And also just creating a governance structure that can legally take revenue from, let's say, recyclable materials, as well as the government, as well as the private sector, as well as from household and business fees, right? Like actually setting that governance structure up, that's part of that participation and engagement that can be quite complicated. On the innovation side, I think we often talk about innovation from a technology standpoint, and that is going to be critical in order to actually bring value to some of these plastics that don't have value. But in another sense, it means innovation in the way that we do things, right? So innovation in the way that we support local governments to build waste management systems when there are none. Innovations in the way that we govern those systems. So innovations in the way that we find to work together, which I think is actually really, really key. And then on the cleanup side of it, we're going into these cities and we're really trying to create much more safer, cleaner, modern cities. And what we've seen is if you build the waste management systems, over 97% of communities stop burning and dumping their waste, right, when they have an outlet. But you also, you want to give them sort of a new start, a fresh beginning. And that's why the cleanup activities are so important. And it's actually tied in with how we think about behavior change, so that they get used to something new. They get used to being part of a very, very clean environment. And that develops a lot of pride and helps, long-term continue this type of behavior change, especially when the alternative of a waste system, which is just dumping or burning, is free and socially acceptable.
And I like the way that you think about innovation beyond, let's say, technological innovation, because I think that's what we normally would, but innovation is a lot more. And at the end of the day, it's all about people. We can have the best systems in place, but if the people are not with us, if the people do not understand the importance of protecting the environment, of the importance of waste management, of the importance of sorting at the level of households, the best system will not be solving the problem. So focusing on the individual, making sure that we all understand why our actions are the way they are, why our behavior is the way it is, and what we can do to change it is absolutely fundamental.
So for the last 2 years, I've been working on a book with 2 other local partners, Hasira Dalla in India and Triciclos, who's based in Chile and Brazil, where we've looked at 5 universal and fundamental constraints that all waste and recycling frontline programs face, and that they really have to solve in order to build robust systems. And one of those is behavior change at scale. And what we found is behavior change is both a science and an art. right? From a science perspective, there's certain ways of building habits, and there's certain sort of ways we think about change in a very systematic process, in a very systematic way. And we also discovered that there were 8 influencing strategies that the best behavior change programs tended to use. And so that's helped us in our own stop cities tremendously to actually really get to the heart of why a community would want to switch from dumping and burning waste to actually not only participating in a waste system, but paying for that waste system for the first time, and actually sorting their waste. And what's interesting is the sort of why differs quite dramatically between communities. So when we go to Bali, for example, Bali is a very Hindu religious community. And so they have a concept called Trihita Karana, which means well-being through connection with God, with nature, and with one another. And so when we talk about waste management, it's how we treat the earth. And that becomes really important to their sense of pride and community and sort of divinity. But when we go to, let's say, Munchar, the economy and the health of their families tends to be the most important drivers, right? So when we talk about standing waste attracting mosquitoes, which can bring dengue fever or malaria, and we talk about sort of, different sort of health conditions that can come from that, or flooding. When we talk about how the fishing boats go out, the propellers get stopped with the plastic, and they get plastic in their nets, and just how that really impacts their productivity and leaders, that becomes really, really powerful cases for change.
What are the lessons that you take away from Jembrana, right? In terms of, we're talking about how do we expand that further? How do we make a real difference? How do we take that lesson and bring that to elsewhere in Indonesia, but even to elsewhere in the region?
So I think there's a few fundamental things that we're learning just from Indonesia broadly, right? One is that the technical parts of the waste system are easier than the human parts. And so to really solve this issue, we have to find ways to collaborate on changing some of the structural dynamics that are making it so hard to set up and operate waste systems. And these are things like making sure that there's enough funding going into the waste system, that there's enough funding coming from government, that there's a way that the private sector can contribute to that cost, and that we get household fees in an easier way, so that the waste systems actually have enough funding to actually operate and do the collection door to door, et cetera. There's another thing about plastics. So I think when we think about plastics generally, we think about plastic bottles, and we think about, sort of the HDPE, the rigid containers, and this is, what tends to be recycled. But what we deal with, and in the environment in Indonesia, in the cities that we work with, 85% of the plastics we deal with are thin film, whether they're plastic bags or sachets or things like that, and those do not have generally a market, at least that's economically viable enough, right? So we need solutions to either artificially or legitimately increase their value.
And I'm fascinated about the change of behavior, right? And we are starting to see that happening in Jembrana. And I remember when I was there, how we visited the community and how the families were proud of being part of that system, being part of even paying into the systems, right, for the sorting and the collection. Could you explain a bit about what's the process that you have gone through to make that transition? Because obviously that doesn't happen overnight.
Most of the places that we work, when we go in, the communities are already incredibly frustrated, right? They will say, we know dumping into the river is wrong, but we have no other choice. What must we do, right? And so I think this idea of blaming communities that they should know better, I mean, if they have no other choice, I mean, what are they going to do? Really, it's just burning or dumping, right? And in general, when we go and we say, hey, would you like this? They say, yes. when can you start? Like, we're ready right now. It gets a little bit more complicated when you talk about asking them to pay for the waste system. So we try to make it as easy as possible and as culturally, let's say, culturally acceptable as possible. So we do things like we give every household 2 bins, a green bin and a yellow bin. So the green is for organic waste, the yellow bin is for non-organic waste. So they don't have to go and buy anything. They don't have to go and figure out how to do it. And we actually come to their house and we teach them how to use it. And then we come to their house and we actually pick up the waste. So we really try to make it really simple. And in order to get everybody involved and on the same page, we host these pretty large community meetings, and it's sort of community by community by community. And together, they sign a declaration that says, we as a community agree to participate in this waste system. And then the head, which is an elected person, the head of that community, signs this, and then it's posted publicly so everyone can see.
Joi, from our conversation, it is obvious that bringing people together is a critical part of any solution that we want to create around plastic waste in the environment. And that goes back, I think, to our appreciation from Oslo and the Our Ocean Conference, in a very different part of this world, that no one can do this alone. It's all about bridging gaps. We all play a critical role in finding the solution, and that each of us has to play as part of that value chain in which we are operating, the plastic value chain. And only if we close all of the gaps, again, are we able to close the loop and create not only a plastic-free environment, but also ensure that we contribute to a circular economy. You've spent 2 years now in Jembrana. You have traveled Bali, you have traveled Indonesia, you have traveled the world. What makes the challenge in particular in Jembrana unique? And also, what is your takeaway for solutions for the future in preventing the leakage of plastic waste into the environment?
1, this problem is solvable, that we can do this if we do this together. 2 is that this problem is a systems problem. We need to work at it from many different angles. And like you said, we all have an important part to play. On those important parts to play, on government side, only government can resolve some of the root cause structural constraints. From the private sector side, don't just focus on one type of plastic, focus on the full waste stream because it's a system. Consider the frontline organizations. Consider how to use your influence to, 1, make sure that frontline waste systems are supported, whether that's through extended producer responsibility or encouraging certain structural constraints to be resolved. And also on the types of products that are being sold into market. So when you're selling into markets that don't have waste systems, the majority of those products, especially if they're lower value plastics, go into the environment. And we have to solve that, and we have to solve that together. And there's several ways of solving it, whether it's material redesign or, investing in waste collection systems, etc. But that we all have an important role to play in actually resolving this.
Joi, your book, Leave No Traces, is a remarkable work that you have carried out together with 2 other colleagues. What made you start that project?
Thank you for asking. I knew that I was going to be trying to build a robust waste system on the ground. But I knew that there was so much I didn't know. And I wanted to find out from those who had actually done it, how to do it. And in particular, there were 5 challenges that seemed almost impossible to solve. And those 5 challenges were: 1, how do you inspire behavior change at scale? So how do you inspire households and to sort their waste or to actually use a waste system for the first time? 2 was waste picker inclusion. So how do we meaningfully and thoughtfully include waste pickers into the waste systems that we want for tomorrow? The 3rd was on affordable waste collection. So how do we actually build waste collection in environments like Indonesia, where I work now, where there's a lack of funding to actually do so? The 4th was on recycling plastics economically, and the 5th was on processing organics. And the reason that was so important is because organics are actually the largest part of the waste system, and the most expensive, and it's very difficult to process them economically. It generally costs a lot more to process them than the revenue that you get for what you process them into. But if you can separate them, then the value of the plastic is so much more.
Joi, I really want to thank you for the work that you have been doing, not only in Jembrana, but also elsewhere in Bali under Project STOP. The amazing work under your book, Leave No Trace. And let me pick up on your messages as to how do we make a real difference. And I want them to be amplified. And I think we can define them around 4 S's. The problem is solvable. We need to ensure that we have the right solutions in place. And with solutions, we need to change the systems in which we are working. But we will only be successful if we bring in everyone in society. Joi, it's a fantastic work that you are leading and that you drive in terms of change.
Jacob, thank you so much for your time today and for allowing me to be part of all of the work that the Alliance is doing.
Thank you, Joi.